CMDA group. I go to Grace Point. We've had lots of folks from the Health Science Center past through the years, and I hear wonderful, wonderful stories about this group. This is an honor to get to be with you today. This is going to be an intersection of a lot of different passion points for me. So I'm a discipleship guy. You're going to see a little bit in a moment that I wear some eclectic hats, but in my mind it's one thread. So when I say I'm a discipleship guy, that means I love Jesus and I love helping other people come to know him and integrate him and experience him in everything they do. That being said, I do it in a number of different arenas with a different set of vocabularies. So sometimes I do it in the business world exclusively, and I talk about business issues, but I believe in business is still a theological issue. And then I do a lot of work with medicine and healthcare, and that's another form of the gospel, another form to talk about who is Jesus and what does that mean. I do stuff with marriage ministries, and I run a missions foundation, help build hospitals in Central America. I do work with kids programs and churches and different things. But in my mind, those are all the same thing, just different sets of vocabulary. And the cool thing is, you guys are at the crossroads of a lot of those. So I'm hoping that in the next few minutes that I have, that I'm going to be able to share some things with you testimonially, that I'm going to try to teach and preach a little bit at you. I'm really hoping it results in inspiring you and equipping you. So I'm going to end as practical as I can, giving you guys examples and tools to encourage you to go and live and lead and practice differently. And then I've got some resources to try to give you more than I can cram into my 30 minutes of a lot of time today. So we're going to try to cover a lot of ground, and I hope it is God-timed in terms of how to intersect with what you're doing. So here's where we're going today. I'm going to share a little bit about where I came from on this briefly, just to give some context. So you go, who's this Mike guy, and why is he going to talk about this? I want to share how God schooled me in preparation for this. And then I want to talk about some principles. This is where we're going to get a little preachy. I am a pastor as well, and so I can get a little fired up about some things. So I want to talk about 3 different power principles, I'm calling them, for people doing ministry in medicine. And then we're going to get very practical and talk about what does it look like to bring Jesus into the office, into the daily life of work, whether that work is in medicine or running a practice. And so we're going to look at some local company examples. And then we're going to look at a case study on health by design and specifically say, what does it mean when Scott says we integrate faith and work, or it's a very Christian culture? What does that really mean? And I want to outline that specifically to hopefully give you guys some approximation ideas. You go, okay, when I find myself in a practice, wherever that may be, what could that look like for me? And then I'll end with enough time for some Q&A, hopefully, and I'll hang around as long as needed afterwards. Okay, so that's where we're going. So first, to give some context, I get called a Yankee sometimes, and that's actually a misnomer because I'm from Alaska, and it's more like Russia or Canada. We didn't exist then. So I grew up mostly in this part of the state, a little bit down here, but just for scale, for those of you who are Texans, it's a big place. So Texas down here, you can have about 2 Texases in there. My journey, God schooling me in talking about this today, led me from Alaska to Chicago for schooling and marriage and career starting, and then ultimately to San Antonio about 8-9 years ago. And the interesting way God weaved that was through a variety of different schools, a variety of different companies that had this blend of me working in the healthcare space and the business space and the financial space and dealing with how these things all kind of intersect. And then I came down here and I logically left a great corporate career to go on staff at a church locally for about 4 years as a pastor. Great career move, and had a lot of fun in that. And while being a discipleship and teaching pastor there, I also launched a company that focused on healthcare strategy work. So I worked with Medicaids and Medicares on how to create care coordination programs and how to deal with population health at a macro level. And then I left those to do my current combo role, which is where I provide fractional leadership for health by design. And I'll explain what that looks like. And then I also own and operate this thing called the C12 Group, which is where I literally disciple business owners and CEOs and key executives on how to integrate Christ into their businesses around the city and around the region. So what that really plays out is put a little more texture before we jump into the so what's for you. So healthcare is a big part of my story. You see at the top there, 1985. Anybody know what JRA is? A few people may have studied that yet. So juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. So I was crippled with an acute case of JRA when I was 4 years old. Wheelchair bound, just really bad. Any joint you really want to have mobility in, I had it there. So that shaped a lot of my life. So I spent most of my childhood going to a lot of hospitals around the country getting care. Not liking it most of the time, but coming to know and experience healthcare at that level. And then when I was 15, my mother had a traumatic brain injury. She's a single mom. We're in Alaska. She slipped and fell into some ice, which we have a lot of. And this time it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And she developed acute epilepsy and impaired frontal lobe function personality and a bunch of different things. And I went from, a kid with some medical issues to a caregiver with some medical issues, caring for a mom or a sibling. And that threw me into the world of caregiving and navigating Medicaid and aid programs. And I went from not knowing much about medicine to speaking at brain injury conferences when I was 17, because this is what you just do. So I experienced a lot of healthcare at the experiential level, personally and caring, right? And then, cool part of the story, I was miraculously healed in 2002 of my disease. That's a whole other talk that I will save for another time. But then, from that healing point, I started working at healthcare companies and having to deal with how do you deliver healthcare to people? And how do you solve the challenge of the great science you guys are learning today, but it's very, very expensive? And how do you get that to the masses? And how do you solve the economic challenges and access challenges of that? So I've had a very interesting journey through a variety of those things. My biggest claim to fame, my greatest skill set so far is I married this lady about 13 years ago, and we found out we make really cute kids. My best skill set is this little girl, Lena, and Sophie. That's our best skill so far. And we are pretty active in the foster adoption communities. We actually helped create a new foster agency last year that's trying to do rescue children in a very gospel-centered way. So our next few kids will look less like us, but will be local kids as well. So again, to give some context, and then we're going to dive right into practical examples. So I own this thing called the C12 group in Central Texas. This is my team that does that. We work with about 85 companies locally, ranging from small law firms and doctor offices to large, hundreds of million-dollar companies. And we talk about what does Jesus mean in the context of doing work, and we get very, very practical about that. I get to do a fractional role helping lead health by design. I steward a missions foundation. I do work in Haiti, hundreds of places. I'm actually leading a trip in March to build a hospital there at an orphanage that serves 650 kids from human sex trafficking. So if you guys, I go there a couple times a year. If anybody ever is looking for a medical trip to Honduras, I'm your guy. And a variety of pieces. All these things are actually all centrally connected for me in being about people. Charles Dickens, in his Christmas Carol story, at one point Scrooge is performed. He's had his epiphany, has come to Jesus moment, and his friends are shocked at his sudden generosity. And they're saying, you're going to ruin your business if you keep giving everything away. And he responds at one point passionately saying, mankind is our business. And that's how he kind of ends his story. And that's kind of been a motto for me ever since I saw a good theater production of that once. But that's it. Mankind is my business. That's what we are called to do, is to serve and help people. So it can happen in a variety of ways, but that's what we're about. So lastly, something shaped me that I'd encourage to shape you guys. I went through a course a few years ago called Leadership Forum. It's a 10-week course. You can get the book on Amazon. It's offered at a variety of places around the city. And it's a practical course in figuring out why you exist and what does that mean, and then how you lead others in that, and how does it shape culture. And I've actually led a number of graduates from CMDA through it. We've gone and shaped clinical practices with questions like, what are my values, and how am I going to teach that, and how am I going to replicate leadership? So for me, I asked the question, why do I exist? My purpose statement, as I landed it, is I exist to love God completely and to lead as many people to love Him as possible while enjoying Him daily. To do that, therefore I must, these are some resolutions, these are things I'm always progressing in and setting goals in. I must be growing in Christ and enjoying Him. I must be stewarding my family. I must be investing in broken people. I must be discipling people to then make disciples. And I must be buckled up for life. This is kind of a catch-all for things like, if you're not healthy and available, you can't help people. So I've got to also be taking care of myself if I want to be in the service of people. And I walk through my personal values and some teachable points of view for my leadership, and I have a family mission set of values as well. I have this printed on my desk, and I literally try to each day evaluate decisions I make, things I get involved in, programs I participate in, problems I go to tackle with the question of how am I called to enter into that based on who I'm called to be. I've put this up here hoping that this kind of clarity might spark the question for you to stop back and go beyond whatever your role is you're studying to be. We each need to ask the question, who am I? Why do I exist? What am I called to do? And to not let that answer be in suspended animation until a future place or a future context. One of God's kind of pivotal points in my life was knowing I was called to do certain things, but believing it was only once the circumstances were ideal, some future state. But if we live outside of who we're called to be, waiting for an ideal future, it'll likely never happen. And who God's called us to be, we have to wrestle out, what does it look like right now in the current constraints, the current limitations I have. So that's why I put that up there. So with that, I want to pivot now to principles, practices, and the teaching side. I put this up here also to say, if there's anything I breezed over story-wise or context-wise that you want to know more about, in our Q&A time or later, I'm an open book. There's nothing you can't ask. So that there's just laying hooks out there if it will help you. But what I'd like to talk about now is some power principles. And I say power principles, sounds really cool. I was trying to think, what are the principles I'd be most concerned about you guys getting and understanding and owning right now that are oftentimes missed. And so some of these are lies and some of these are truths. And I'm hoping that they will resonate with you now, because it can be a game changer for the rest of your career. So the first one is a fallacy. I call it the intimacy inversion fallacy. At some point along the way, and I don't know where you all are in your faith journey, it is easy to buy the lie that my intimacy or faith vitality or my life of adventure with God, me living on mission, is a byproduct or function of my schedule. And that there's just this inverse problem that I'm so busy, that's why this is really weak. And that if I want to go over here and have a really great life with Christ, I just need to get my schedule broken. And that's a really frustrating belief, because most of you are probably fairly busy, right? Most medical students and residents and doctors I know have the craziest schedules I've ever seen. Well, I used to run a small group with mostly surgical residents. My wife would call their wives, she called them medical widows, right? It's intense. So if your quality of life with God is going to be a function of your schedule, then you guys are doomed to have a really bad decade. And I don't think that's God's desire for you. But I don't think it's practical to suddenly go, well, we're just going to work 20 hours a week and have all this time for prayer, meditation, and reflection. So we have to reject the lie that this is an inverse relationship. Because if that's the life God's called us to, then it's a pretty fragile faith. But the life Jesus invites us to is one that's a lot more robust, a lot more integrated in the busyness. And so a way that you can know that you're probably buying this lie is even how you talk about time. So for instance, this is a mock-up of an Outlook calendar. I don't know how you guys track your time. I'm a pretty calendar-driven guy. It is easy to begin to segment our days and our time, thinking that there's God time. So maybe you get to church on Sunday, maybe you have some quiet time, some sort of devotional practice in the morning. Maybe you're part of an organization that has some sort of midweek evening gathering, whether it's a church or a small group, and it's easy to talk about this being my God time, which implies that the rest of this white stuff is my time. And then we wonder why squeezing 15 minutes or an hour here doesn't penetrate all the way through the other 23 hours of our craziness. And we live a life where we have this false kind of duality. And it's not the invitation of God. God's invitation would not be for a segregation of God time and me time, but that time spent intimately pursuing and growing in God would actually be the launch pad of a day spent with God, a life of mission. And so part of what I'm hoping to convey today is that a bigger picture of what God would have for us. That God would have our day, even a day of classes and a day of work and a day of surgeries and a day of drama and admin and paperwork, that those things are actually the form in which God would like to know us, be known by us, and work through us. So some of this is based upon a theology shift I'd like to do, and that's what I call theology of vocation, or vocational discipleship. I believe right now, whether you are in school, or whether you're early in your career or advanced in your career, how you live out your daily work is the primary place you're going to demonstrate your theology and prove your theology. It's one thing to gather at churches on Sunday and talk about God being a certain thing or who we are, but how you live Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is what is actually the proof of that. And it's where you get to test that out. Do you really believe God is good? Do you really believe God is powerful? God is present? God is wise? His ways are better? Well, if I don't live them, then I probably don't. And so the context of work is not just a place for my personal discipleship, but it's a place for me to also advance His call in my life. So I'd like to challenge the context. There's a term out there now called marketplace ministry, and it can be thought of as kind of a new, resurgent, kind of vogue thing, but it's actually incredibly ancient. If you think about the primary characters in the Bible, throughout from the very beginning to the very end, guys like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Nehemiah, David in the Old Testament, these guys were not working 10-hour weeks. They weren't spending 8 hours a day at some false retreat center, detached from reality, and thus they were able to be so super spiritual. Abraham had hundreds of employees and was constantly living in hostile territories, right? Isaac and Jacob is saying Nehemiah was working for a pagan king in a pagan government and dealing with a building project in a hostile place. Even King David was dealing with a bunch of conflict and had large family, large drama, big economic challenges. The history of mankind has been people who are very busy, who have lots of challenges, who have lots of responsibility, and in that experience great faith. And so back to my earlier point, there's not an inverse relationship between your current schedule and your faith life. In fact, in the Old Testament, there's a Hebrew word called avodah, the Hebrew word for work. And the Hebrew word for doing work well is actually the same concept as worship. So it's a Hebrew belief that work done perfectly well to its fullest extent in the service of others is actually one of the highest expressions of worship. And so if you're called to be a craftsman or a physician or a teacher or whatever it may be, that's done to its highest degree is actually an act of worship. And so our work is not just something you go do to provide for yourself that you can then go fund ministry projects on the side. Whatever your work is intended to be itself an act of worship. Then it's also worth noting, if you read through the Gospels, and you think about all the times Jesus did stuff, you think about where he was when he did it, 92% of all the stories you have of Jesus in the Gospels did not occur in temple settings, or synagogue settings. They happened in workplace settings, in the daytime hours of the week, in messy places where people were not expecting to encounter a teacher, a healer, or a life-changing encounter with God. In the parables he used, out of the 52 parables, 42 of them he used workplace parables. He gave examples of their work life as an illustration of what a truth from God would look like lived out. And then 100% of his apostles, or the 12 disciples, were workplace guys, right? It was small business owners, a government employee, a physician. There was no, he didn't go grab a bunch of priests. He called 12 guys that had common jobs, and he worked through them and then sent them out. And so this ancient paradigm of our work being the context of mission is one of the oldest for the people of God, and it's one that I hope we can grab hold of, because in the last couple of centuries, we've come to think of church and mission in fairly compartmentalized ways. And that's what's led to a lot of the tragedies of business life and healthcare, frankly, is that those two things have been separated too much. So a couple of things that are true biblically that blaze through them. So out of curiosity in this room, I don't know any of your guys' story. How many of you guys at some point before today acknowledged a call to full-time ministry as either a missionary or a pastor? By show of hands. Anybody? Okay. Scott, one. Okay, so, and then one guy at the back. Okay, that was a bait and switch. So, how many of you believe Jesus calls you to be a part-time disciple? Okay, a couple. Okay, so good answer, but I'm going to say biblically wrong. So I don't think Jesus ever called anybody to be a part-time disciple. In fact, in Christ, if you follow Jesus and declare yourself a Christian, and you've had a point where you've come to declare him as Lord of your life and experience his life, every single person is called to be a disciple making disciple, and a minister of his gospel, and an ambassador of Christ. Every single one of us. Not, and regardless of who pays you, regardless of your W-2, regardless of your daytime vocation. So we sometimes have this false separation that if I didn't go to seminary, then I get to just do work and then try to squeeze in some ministry stuff on the side. And I'd like to challenge that biblically that's just not true. Biblically, we are all equally called to live our lives in ministry. It just looks different. We're all called to be disciples. It just looks different. We're all called to make disciples. It just will look different. I will also argue that you are likely given a much bigger mission field potential than Scott. I'm going to say that because who's guys from Sharrow Hills here? How many people do you think show up at Sharrow Hills on a Sunday who know nothing about Jesus? Not enough? I can promise you a lot more people walk through this school and walk through a hospital on any given week than ever walk through a single church that don't know about God. Right? We're given the advantaged mission field position to impact the world, both the world that does not know about God, as well as help build up those who do know about God. So we're called to be ambassadors, disciple makers, ministers. There is no sacred versus secular. So you are a called out person. What you go to do, it doesn't matter whether it's paperwork at the hospital or whether it's treating a patient or whether it's doing a mission trip to Del Rio, you're called to be who you are in Christ all the time. And when we separate, this is just work, this is just school, this is ministry, that's what breeds a lot of dysfunction and soulical dissatisfaction, because we're called to be one person all the time. Colossians 3:17-23 is where Paul exhorts us, saying, essentially, whatever you do, do it as if you're doing it for Christ. Well, if Jesus showed up and said, would you go take care of this patient for me, you would respond a certain way. Or if Jesus said, hey, I'd like to watch you do some process, create a new administrative process on this for me, and it was for God, literally, he's like, they're watching you, you'd probably view that with a little bit of intensity and weight. He does. So he says, literally, I don't care if a boss or a professor or a customer asks you to do something and they're the farthest thing from a picture of Jesus. Pretend it's from me and do your work in that kind of way. It's interesting to note that in the garden, before there was sin, right? Before sin entered the world and there's all this brokenness, we were created to do fellowship with God. He gave us work before there was sin. Work is not a consequence of sin. Work being frustrating is a consequence of sin. But we were told to do work at the very beginning. Put in the garden, said tend to the garden, to take care of it. We were told to eat, we were told to do marriage, do life together. So these things are all pre-fall mandates for us that are typically harder and broken because of sin. But they're things that God looks to restore through us as well. Lastly, then we'll just do a case study piece. Blue rubber bands. So anybody ever seen a Jewish person with tassels on their pockets? Have you ever wondered why? It's an old, ancient Jewish custom that established in Numbers 15, 37, 39, where Moses said, listen, you're about to go to the promised land, you're about to be very, very busy, you're about to work a lot of hours, you're going to be building farms, raising families, and dealing with wars, and you're going to forget who you are, who brought you here, and how you're supposed to be. So put tassels on the corner of their garments with a blue thread. The blue thread is to remind them that they are priestly people, that you will remember who you are and how to obey me in everything you do every day. And the passage literally says, because if you don't, you'll just tend to forget and you'll drift off and do things your way. I think it's a wonderful reminder from God saying, I get that you're busy, I get that you're working 15-hour days. That's not the problem. Just don't forget me in the process. Ask me how I would have you do those things. So I get blue rubber bands for people because I think it's cooler than tassels. And then I had little custom ones made that say, remember that we're called to love God, love people, and it has the passage on the inside. And I brought those for you guys later. But the busiest of our days is the best place to experience God, the best place to live out our faith in God. And here's what it can look like. So this is a little report I just released a few months ago for working with some companies locally. To give an example, just to inspire, in the fourth quarter last year, 69 local companies who had about 6,000 employees who did the math and realized they are regularly ministering to, on a monthly basis, about 350,000 people locally between customers, patients, vendors, and neighbors right around them. Those 69 companies that are small businesses, 40, 50, 60 employees, saw 100 salvations at their workplaces last year, discipled 2,000 people in regular ongoing discipleship, and gave about $8 million in missions. Now, the way they did that was through a variety of different ministry strategies. Some of them implemented workplace chaplains, some of them had Bible studies, prayer meetings, faith-based training around skills, conflict, marriage, leadership, communication. Others had Christ-centered strategies implemented in their businesses that made their very business practice a discipleship experience for employees. A number of them did mission trips with their business, a number did local service projects. But what drove all this was this little research project done here nationally about 2 years ago. And that is that the average business, this happens to talk with CEOs, had 8,000 times the mind share in the unbelieving world than a local church does, because we're together 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week. You may go to church 30 minutes to an hour, once a week, most weeks. So it's just a huge, huge mission field, and it's happening locally in all kinds of companies, tech companies, financial companies, banks, doctor's offices, dentists. And so I wanted to go into a specific case study of a local medical company. So Health and Design is a corporate wellness company right over here on the other side of I-10. Do on-site clinics, do all sorts of different pieces. But here's how being missional at work has affected this company. It's affected the culture. So we'll talk about our company's culture as being that we're about faith, family, and fun, that we want to make sure that we encourage and promote spiritual health in our people, that we encourage work-life balance, that family is important, family is more important than our work even, and that we have fun and we connect passion to the work we do. It's one thing to say that, it's another thing to actually drive that. To actually go, hey, I see that your family is suffering. We're going to do what it takes to give you time to go home and deal with that so that we'll take care of the ranch here. You need to be who you're called to be at home. Or you need your life's just flaming out. We want to help see that get corrected. We view people as whole beings, not just employees. Following Jesus drives our policy. So policies like how we deal with conflict resolution, Is this going to be the normal way of business in the world, or are we going to look at Matthew 18 principles and actually do biblical conflict resolution? How are we going to deal with grievances? How are we going to deal with vendors? How are we going to deal with financial issues and debt? We actually have ministries at work. We do prayer meetings. We do Bible studies. We go and serve people. We send people on trips. We care for our people differently. We respond to needs in crisis for folks with financial hardship or medical hardship. We truly, truly engage in caring for people differently with us and then people who come to our offices. It's not uncommon for a doctor in our office to, at the end of an exam, go, I'm treating your depression. I can write you a prescription for it. Your depression is really a byproduct of your eating habits and your weight habits issues and your heart disease, which is really a byproduct of your stress and your broken marriage and the fact that you're spiritually just kind of bankrupt. And I can prescribe this up here, but the root's way down here. And while I can't treat this today and solve it, if I can't speak into that, I'd like to pray for you. They'll give a devotional to the patient. They'll create a chance for God to work through them in a more deeper issue than just the clinical issue they're getting invited to treat. And we routinely see that change lives way more radically than the pill is going to do anyway. We actually employ an outside chaplain company. Comes in chaplains 24/7 available to minister to our employees and talk to them and pray with them, be available to counsel through drama and crisis or concerns in their life and have it be confidential so that they don't feel like they're telling their boss about their drug addiction or the drama going on in their home. And then we've also believed that Jesus has called us to create a new kind of healthcare system. So many of you guys are going to be frustrated going to systems where you feel like your values and personal desires are just frustrated by the bureaucracy you're in, or the insurance paradigm you're operating under, or the freedom you're given. And we really believe that we're called to keep innovating and trying to say, well, how do we create a better model where that can happen? So we've worked on doing that. We created an insurance-free medical business where patients and physicians get to do medicine the way we believe they should. And all of this stuff has actually driven us to actually frame this strategically. And that's what a lot of our businesses will do in this C12 organization. So we actually said our mission is we're called to heal people and to bring transformational leadership to the way healthcare is experienced for the glory of God. And so we'll be very upfront talking to a city government, a county government, a Fortune 50 company, and say, hey, we're here to do medicine. We're going to do medicine in a great way. Your people are going to get well. It's got to be best science. It's got to be economically viable. But you need to know we're doing it to actually really heal people. And we're doing it to glorify God. That's our motivation. That's going to be what drives us. You don't have to agree with us on God, but you need to know that's going to be what's driving us. Our vision is to see this change the country, and our values also is a place where we create our decision-making around these values. We're about extraordinary pursuits shaped by our faith. That compassion fuels the way we care. We believe that good medicine means everybody must win. And we're radically passionate about genuine healing. Well, these values are not just things you put up on the wall. These are things like in staff meetings and negotiations and problem solving. We regularly bring these out and go, okay, is this way going to reflect our faith? Is this truly compassionate? Is everyone going to win in this? There was a staff meeting this week where we argued about things because we were worried about a decision possibly compromising our values here. It was legal, it was ethical, it was fine, but was it true to who God called us to be? So this is one healthcare company with 80, 90 employees where Jesus is not just something they talk about or give money to. We do that. It's not just something where we pray periodically, but we do that. But it's actually shaping the whole way the company operates. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, I was told to ask for this, we're also desperately hiring nurses and doctors. So this is a quick little pitch. We need doctors here, Corpus Christi, Houston, Beaumont, Panhandle, real quick. Nurses and doctors, see me afterwards. But the reason I share this actually is most of you guys are here and you're going to be transitioning out to other places in the country. You're going to be doing fellowships other places, working other places. And my hope is that getting to see examples of a company doing this will actually let you take this and do something different there. I would love to see a company, check out our website, you can see the things we're doing. I'd love to find out that people from this medical school who passed through CMDA went out and set up medical practices in Georgia, in Florida, in Washington, in Oregon, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, Ohio, and built practices way better than health design because you saw the things that we're doing here. And we're just experimenting and seeing them actually work. But it's because if you're called to do medicine, you're also called to glorify God and be an ambassador of Him in how you do it. And it requires us to daily be asking, how would Jesus have me approach this aspect of business differently? What would that look like? I brought some handouts down here for you to take on the way out. These are magazines that are a national publication highlighting different examples of businesses integrating faith in their companies. It's not a C12 thing, it's just a great journal I buy, and there happens to be a 4-page article covering help by design in this edition. I've got blue rubber bands because that's a good reminder for me. I've got business cards in case you need to contact me. I've even got some flyers here, and that's for everybody, that has books, websites, key biblical stats, examples of how to take next steps, and also my contact information around the idea of taking Jesus into our office more consistently. But if I could challenge you to one thing, it would be to know that your sweetest time of growing in God would be if you begin to invite the office work and the school work and the study work to actually be the place in which you grow with God. And that you would ask God to just live in the tension of the question, how would Jesus want to shape this aspect of medicine, or this aspect of hospital administration, or this aspect of dentistry, or whatever you're going into, and let God do something disruptive through you. And then also, anytime you're gathering and you're doing Bible studies and you're reading about God, begin to ask yourself, how would I live that out today or tomorrow in the middle of a 16-hour day? Because that's where the game begins to change. And I can't tell you the number of stories of changed lives we're seeing in the city and the region as people begin to do this. So those are some illustrations and some points. I think I've got 3 minutes before I told people are going to start leaving in mass exodus. Is there questions you would have more specifically for me before I rattle on more? Yes?
Are the chaplains employees of your company?
Great question. Are the chaplains employed by the company? No. So there are some companies who do that. I think it's legally a little tricky. So there's actually 3 or 4 different companies out there nationally that for a very small fee will send in a fractional pastor to be available as the chaplain for your people and available 24/7 by phone. And the nice thing about that is they're professionals and they have no conflict of interest. Because at some point if I say, hey, Scott's my pastor, talk to him, but he reports to me and you report to me and you tell him that you're stealing, he's probably he now has to tell me that, right? Or you're addicted and he's gonna be like, gosh, do I tell Mike, not tell Mike? These guys are outside and all they tell me is how many people they met with. And if there's any themes they're hearing that I need to be more aware of in my company. But yeah, great question.
Yeah.
Other questions? Going once, go twice. Okay? So, I'm putting my contact information up here, and I have it down here because if you look through our website, or if you'd like to know anything more specific, how we pay for these things, how it's structured, who we hire, what those things can do, what's the legal ramifications of this. If there's anything you'd ever like to know more about this, feel free to ask me. Ask me anything. I had to really pare down, try not to cram too much more than I already did into this session today. But the work God will want to do in you and through you in your career is breathtaking if you will embrace it. And if you will realize that it is a full-time call. So I think with that, I'm going to let people go. Is there anything we're going to say at the end?
Maybe. Just a little. You want to pray for them?
Sure. Can I pray for you guys? God, thank you that you loved us so much, that you didn't just send Jesus to ransom us and save us, but you actually did call us sons and daughters, and that you choose to send us out as your ambassadors. We are your plan. We are your people, and that you are a God who gets the busyness of life. Father, the most frequent command in your scripture was to remember. This implies that we are forgetful. And Father, these men and women are in a crazy season of life with intense hours and expectations and decisions being made simultaneously. And Father, I pray that they would come to experience life and rejuvenation through you. I pray that Jesus would be real to them in the midst of their days. I pray that your Spirit would call out truth in them, and that they would apply that truth, live that truth, test that truth even now. I pray, God, that even now you begin to give them a vision for what you would do through them in their work, and that they would view this career of medicine, whatever form of it is taking, that it would be a life of mission living. That their life would not be work interrupted by periodic mission trips, but they would live a life of mission. And that your name would be glorified through it, their lives would be changed by it, and that the world would be blessed through it. I pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Thank you, guys.